Have we seen the last of the 300-game winners in baseball? Can any of today's pitchers match the likes of legends Cy Young, Walter Johnson, or Warren Spahn? How do players like Greg Maddux or Nolan Ryan or Roger Clemens compare to some of the game's earlier pitchers? And could any of today's pitchers make the record books? We'll take a look at baseball's exclusive 300 Club right now on It's Your Call. It is one of the most exclusive clubs in sports. It consists of pitchers who have won 300 games or more. Some have accomplished it and wonder if that number will ever change. We want to know what you think. Hello, everyone. It's good to have you with us. I'm Lynn Doyle. So here's a trivia question for you. What do Hall of Fame pitchers Bob Feller, Jim Palmer, Tommy John, and Bob Gibson all have in common? They're all in Cooperstown, right? They all had winning records, but they are not part of the 300 Club. Not one won the exclusive 300 games. So who did? Well, you can find out in a new book. It's called The 300 Club. Have we seen the last of the 300 game winners? And it's written by Dan Schlossberg, who is my special guest on this hour of It's Your Call. Hey, Dan, good to have you with us.
Thanks, and great to be here.
So only 24 men have ever accomplished getting into the 300 Club. Why is it so exclusive, and why is it so elusive to those pitchers?
It's a really hard thing to do because baseball today, for example, pitching strategy has changed. Pitching philosophy has changed. There's a pitch count. Every pitcher has a pitch count in his game, usually around 100 pitches. Then the managers and the pitching coaches start to think, well, all these bullpen guys are getting so much money. I want a fresh arm in there for late in the game. Also, pitchers today work on a 5-man rotation. In the old days of baseball, even when I was a kid in the 50s and 60s, growing up, it was a 4-man rotation. That makes a huge difference.
So is it fair to compare today's pitchers to the greats of the golden era of baseball? Because obviously they were playing under different conditions. Why not have different record books?
Well, it's the same as saying, should every stadium be the same? Every stadium is different, and therefore you can't compare, say, Ryan Howard with the Phillies with maybe Prince Fielder of Milwaukee, because they play in different home parks and they play half their schedules that way. So you can compare pitchers of this era with pitchers of an earlier era, but I think what you have to look at is a greater era, such as post-World War II, and then we're really talking about great pitchers.
Well, of course, the records are held by pitchers typically who pitched before World War II. I mean, Cy Young, who some say is the absolute best pitcher ever in the history of baseball, although I'll tease you and tell you that not everybody agrees with that. Cy Young pitched in a completely different era, and his records still hold today. Why is that?
Well, first of all, I want to point out that the 4 biggest winners in baseball history pitched simultaneously for 1 year only, and that year was 1911. So you're absolutely right. It happened a long, long time ago.
Boy, there's a great trivia question to ask someone. I'm going to think of that in a bar someday and see if I can win some money. Okay, 1911.
And I'm sure your viewers want to know who they are.
Who were they?
Well, Cy Young, certainly, because he's number 1. Walter Johnson. Grover Cleveland Alexander was a rookie that year. And Christy Mathewson. Those are the 4 biggest winners in baseball history.
So, boy, the people that were watching ball at the time had no idea, literally, that they were watching history being made. And for those records to sustain for a century is amazing.
Oh, it really is. But again, it was so different. Pitching staffs in the 19th century, there were no such thing as pitching staffs. In fact, they couldn't call to the bullpen because they didn't have a telephone. When baseball first started in 1876, that was the year Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. So there were no doctors, there were no trainers, there was no bullpen, there was no phone, so starting pitchers were expected to go all the way, and most teams had a 2-man pitching staff. So one guy would pitch 90% of the games, the other guy would pitch when the first guy was hurt.
You know, when I was reading your book, the thing that I really enjoyed was the fact that all of those pitchers that you mentioned and others during that era seemed to have one thing in common, that they were like farmhands, or that they came from, like, you know, middle America, where in the off season they were working absolutely just as hard and perhaps maintaining great physical shape because of it.
Right.
And they had that work ethic that some people wonder if it still exists today.
Right, and they weren't very well paid at all. The early pitchers, I mean, the union started way after World War II, and so the early pitchers, they really had to work hard, and they did have to have off-season jobs. And the way they were discovered, Walter Johnson pitched for a telephone company semi-pro team. That's how he was discovered. And a lot of these guys had stories like that.
In your book, you actually outlined the 24 men who are in this exclusive 300 club, and you have the rare opportunity to have spoken to the 10 living 300 winners. What was that like for you as a reporter?
Right, plus a couple of guys who passed away that I interviewed years and years ago. But it was great tracking down these 10 because, first of all of them are retired except Randy Johnson won his 300th game last year. He was the only active pitcher among the 10 living 300 game winners in 2009. So therefore, I had to find these guys at their homes. And it's really hard because everybody is trying to track these guys down. They're celebrities, just like movie stars. And it's really hard to find. So sometimes you have to go through the agents. But the agents were great.
Must have been a thrill for you, though, to talk to these guys because they are forever going to be in this exclusive 300 club and forever in the record books. I found it interesting, though, that when we asked you who you thought the best pitchers were, that some of your choices might be considered controversial, others might be agreed upon by our viewers. Let's go through them. Your top 5. Number 5 is Nolan Ryan. Why?
Because Nolan Ryan did things that no other pitcher did. 5,000 plus strikeouts and 7 no-hitters. Now that's just incredible. Nobody else pitched more than 4 no-hitters. He pitched 7. Now Nolan Ryan also pitched and played Major League Baseball longer than anybody else in baseball history. 27 years. Exceptional.
This guy is indestructible. It's just amazing. And so far, we have not heard anything bad about him, like that he had performance-enhancing drugs or that he used any other kind of substance or anything like that. Okay, number 4 on your list of the greatest pitchers of all time, and this goes all the way back to the start of baseball to last year, Greg Maddux, the professor.
Now, Greg Maddux, he is the professor because he was so smart. He had a book in his head of every hitter, every pitch he ever threw. He knew what he threw to this guy the last at bat, and he knew what he threw to this guy 5 years ago. So he was very, very smart, probably smarter than anybody else in baseball history as far as that goes. But also, of the 10 living 300-game winners, he has the most victories. In other words, he has the most wins of any pitcher living today.
He's won over, I think, Roger Clemens?
Won over Roger Clemens. He has 355.
Okay. He was a nice guy, too, right?
Maddux was great. Very introverted guy, soft-spoken, modest to a T. Really, really great guy.
Okay. Number 3 on Dan's all-time best pitcher list is Warren Spahn, the best lefty ever. And I'll have an opportunity to share a story with you. I actually interviewed him myself when I was a sports reporter early on in my career, and he had a wicked sense of humor.
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did. But what made him wicked on the mound?
Warren Spahn was a pitcher who adjusted. When his fastball faded, he developed a screwball, and he was durable. He once told me, he said, I had to pitch every 4th day. If I had a sore arm or a sore knee or a sore shoulder, if I didn't pitch, we had 1-year contracts then. If I didn't pitch, they'd get somebody else. So he had to do it. Now, what was great about Spahn, 363 wins, not only the most by any left-handed pitcher, but the most by any pitcher after World War II. So that's really incredible. And 13 20-win seasons. Unbelievable. By comparison, last year, National League, nobody won 20 games.
Now, he was a lefty, but he's not the lefty that we all know and love in Philadelphia, Steve Carlton. We're going to talk about him in just a minute, but I want to finish your list. Get this, folks. On Dan's list, he lists Cy Young, who had 511 wins, the all-time record in baseball history, as his number 2 pick. Explain, Lucy. I don't get it.
Well, Cy Young is the only 300-game winner whose career spanned both the 19th and the 20th century. In the 19th century, the rules were different. Teams were changing in and out every year. For a while, there were 12 teams in the league. Then there were 8 teams in the league. There were other major leagues. Things were really different. Balls and strikes were different. Number of balls and strikes he needed. Things were so different when he pitched, and he pitched almost every day, which is why he won 511 games. But he was also the only person ever to lose 300 games in his career.
Oh, my God. When you do the math, and he has 800 games under his belt.
Yeah,
I mean,
800 decisions.
Yes. That's amazing.
But
absolutely.
How could a 300-game loser be number 1 on my list? No way.
Well, but he's number 1 on everybody else's list, Dan. I hate to tell you. They give out what's called the Cy Young Award. You've heard of it, right?
Right. Well, just for the most wins. People are deluded by the most wins. It's not just... When you get to the number 1 guy on my list, I'll explain what I mean by that.
Well, you're going to have to do it right now because number 1 on his list, and I wish I had a drum roll, is Walter Johnson. Wait, who? I don't hear anybody getting the Walter Johnson Award.
Well, number 1, Walter Johnson would have won more games than Cy Young if his team, the Washington Senators, had been a decent team. Most of the time it was first in war, first in peace, and last in the American League. So, I mean, the Senators were terrible. And he still won 400